Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Equity in STEM Engagement Focus Area session. We're delighted you're joining us today. I know you had some choices, and we're equally excited about the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility work we can accomplish through the Equity Action Plan. As you heard, a STEM engagement focus area was not included in this current Equity Action Plan, but will be included in the next one. That's why we wanted to use our opportunity for this focus session to concentrate on our K-12 audiences, both formal and informal, and to help us build our strategies for the new plan next year. Next slide, please. So we're looking forward to, oops, hold on, I'm getting some odd things coming up on my screen. As we get started, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. We're looking forward to a constructive interaction. We'll be using a couple of additional tools to gather your input. One is the WebEx poll feature, which you've already seen, that appeared to the right of your screen when you clicked on polling. Since we want to maximize your ability to provide input to us, we are also going to be using, something called the I/O tool. The I/O tool can be accessed either by going to nasa.cnf.io or to the QR code on the screen. If you want to take a moment now to open up another web browser and go to the I/O tool, then that you can get yourself all settled for as we move through this session. And just a reminder, with the exception of the NASA speakers, all microphones will be muted. Next slide, please. These were the questions that we asked in the poll, which closed out while we were listening to the end of the plenary session. So we were interested in if this was the first outreach event you've been hosted, from NASA you had hosted. How did you learn about this town hall? And before the meeting, were you familiar with NASA's Equity Action Plan? Next slide, please. We also wanted to get a sense of the folks that we have joining us today, and I do appreciate you joining us. I do see some familiar names in the attendee list, so we're glad to see you participating. As you heard during the plenary session, there are a total of 5 sessions being held today covering equity in procurements and contracts, grants and cooperative agreements, climate data accessibility and environmental justice, and civil rights compliance and accessibility to limited English proficient populations. We'll be posting in the chat the links to the other Equity Action Plan focus area sessions if you decide you would like to join one of them. And now I'd like to introduce the NASA Associate Administrator for STEM Engagement, Mike Kincaid.
Hey, thanks, Diane. I'm really glad to be here today. And as Diane mentioned, and as Pam mentioned in her earlier session, there's lots of places you could be. So the fact that you're choosing to spend time with us means a lot to us. And as before Chris talked to you more about the K-12 effort, I want to spend a few minutes talking big picture, so you have a context of how our questions today fit into the larger landscape. So, Lisa, if you go to the next slide, that'd be great. So I'll just pause here and to say that our vision, mission, and strategic goals, we approved these in 2017. We're 5 years into these, and these do provide kind of an overarching landscape of why do we do the work that we do. You know, we engage students in NASA's mission. We use that mission to help students be able to see how they could fit into something like NASA. To give them a future direction, if you will. And like I said, Chris will talk about some of the K-12 efforts that we have underway, and Tara will spend some time talking about ways we've already looked at what are those barriers. But we want to hear from you about your thoughts. Lisa, next slide. So you'll see, and I think for many people who are on the call today know that there are lots of different NASA things that are happening at the undergraduate level, at the graduate level, at K-12, with partnerships with people all across this country. And this map kind of gives you a sense of the different things that happen, kind of a heat map of where where things are happening. And it won't come as any surprise to you that the darkest locations are those where we both have larger populations of students. So it's important to note that it does reach across the country, and we're always looking for ways that we can reach underserved audiences. Next slide. I do want to pause here. And Diane kind of mentioned this already that, if you listen to Pam, she talked about 4 areas, and yet this is this 5th one. And Diane mentioned that we'll be adding this into the action plan next year. And so we really are interested in hearing your thoughts before this becomes a definite permanent addition to the equity action plan. That we've had a chance to hear people from our constituency give us suggestions and thoughts and suggestions. And I think Tara and Diane have done a great job today of outlining a structured way that we can get your feedback before we finalize. So I think that that's so we're looking forward to hearing from you and from your thoughts about what we're doing and how this could fit together. So thank you very much. And with that, I think I turn it over to the next person.
Thank you. Are you all hearing me okay?
Can hear you great. Thanks, Tara.
Wonderful. So I just want to take a minute and reiterate all of the thank yous for participating today. As was just shared, this town hall is really an opportunity for us to hear from you, our stakeholders. You are all very purposefully selected because you work with the students that NASA is aiming to attract to STEM. As we in the Office of STEM Engagement have set about working to meet our strategic goals, we have committed to building evidence that assesses our progress. The framework for this town hall is built upon the findings from a needs assessment and gap analysis that we recently completed. Many of you participated in that study, sharing your perceptions regarding NASA's STEM engagement K-12 resources. As we reviewed the findings from that study, we saw that many of our stakeholders who work in communities that are underserved and underrepresented had strong feedback about how NASA can meet the needs of diverse learners. With that in mind, today is an opportunity for us to dig deeper, learn more, and have really engage you on those questions that can inform our next steps on the Equity Action Plan. Next slide. So we have 4 guiding questions today. We are going to ask you what barriers exist trying to access and use NASA STEM engagement K-12 activities. What needs do you have for your students? What supports or contributions from NASA would make the most impact to the national effort in post-pandemic educational recovery? And what should NASA do to attract diverse groups of students to STEM? The answers that you provide will be used as part of our continuous improvement process, and we will take what we learn to influence future activities and resources, and this will inform outcomes of our K-12 efforts. So I'm looking forward to having that discussion today and hearing from you all. But before we do that, I'm going to turn things over to Chris Brown, our Deputy Associate Administrator for Strategy and Integration for NASA's Office of STEM Engagement, to share more about NASA's K-12 investments.
Thanks, Tara. Good afternoon, everyone. It's again, I'll just echo what you've already heard. We're thrilled that you've joined us today. We go to the next slide, please. So Mike shared with you our strategy with our 3 strategic goals. And in addition to those goals, we have selected 3 areas of priority that are driving our work over the next 3 years in order for us to achieve those goals. And one of them is to enhance our work in K-12. And that is really in recognition of the need to bolster our activities in order for us to enable a foundation of students in the K-12 area of our STEM engagement continuum, in order for us to help students, attract them to get on STEM pathways, and then in hopes that NASA can contribute to inspiring those students and providing them additional learning opportunities that help them move along those STEM pathways toward an interest in a career in STEM. You'll see on this slide that we are focused on a framework that allows us to think about a continuum of opportunities along the path for students to move into college studies and hopefully later into some of our programs that enable them in their graduate studies as well. In order to do that, we look to form evidence-based opportunities that attract students and then start to build on those experiences with accessible and engaging opportunities to enable them to navigate STEM pathways. And then we also provide experiential learning in the high school realm in order to help prepare students for STEM pursuits. If you go to the next slide, please. In order to focus and enhance our work in K-12, we have built a framework that looks at that foundation of work and through the lens of in a sense, three categories of experiences. First are unique learning opportunities to attract students, then incremental learning opportunities to enable them on STEM student pathways, and finally, those immersive experiential learning opportunities to help prepare students to go to college. And what you'll see on this slide is a collective group of experiences and opportunities that we provide to students, and also resources and opportunities that we provide to educators in order to allow them to help us reach students. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Tara now so that she can talk a little bit more about our outcomes and the work that we're doing in this realm.
So as I mentioned earlier, we are committed to building evidence to ensure that we are meeting our goals. The activities that you just heard about in the K-12 world are intentionally designed with students and educator outcomes in mind. These outcomes are those that research tells us contribute to attracting diverse students to STEM. Many of you here today are educators, so you can think of this like our backwards design. We want students to increase their STEM interest, become aware of STEM careers, grow their STEM identity, and ultimately pursue STEM majors and careers. We follow the literature and research to create activities that reach those outcomes, and we ensure educators who are delivering the experiences feel that they can deliver the content and the experiences. In addition to driving the product design, this framework gives us a way to assess whether we are meeting our objectives. So if we know what we are aiming to do, we can measure that appropriately. Next slide. We've set up a rigorous process to evaluate our STEM engagement work and our K-12 programs and activities. This rigorous process has moved us from a place of exploring NASA's role in the K-12 ecosystem to understanding what stakeholders need, to developing programs and tools that meet those needs. You can see that we've highlighted here the K-12 needs assessment that I spoke about earlier. Today's session is really connected to digging deeper on the needs of the K-12 community so that when we move to program redesign, we have confidence that what we're doing meets the needs of our stakeholders. So with that, I'm going to pass it back to Diane, who is going to get us started on the discussion. And I really look forward to hearing your input and what you have to say. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mike, Chris, and Tara for your remarks. As those of you that have joined us, you can see that K-12 work, diversity, and evaluation are embedded into our strategic goals, our plans, and the efforts we do to ensure that our programs remain on target. Now we'd like to hear from you. Next, let's see, which slide are we on? Yeah, the first question is, as you heard Tara mention, is the first of four. We're going to use the IO tool because this gives you an opportunity to provide us more in-depth feedback about what we're doing. We'll unlock that first poll question in there. And if you go to the IO tool, so go to nasa.cnf.io, or use the QR code to open up a browser. Click on the NASA STEM engagement session within the IO tool, and you'll see the poll question. So the first question we'd like to hear from you about is, what barriers have you experienced in using or engaging with NASA for learners underrepresented in STEM or varying abilities or skill levels? As Tara mentioned, we've really looked to invite people to this session that are working with learners underrepresented in STEM, and for us to get a chance to understand where we need to be working with learners of all different levels. This was, as Tara said, this was tied to the K-12's needs assessment, but we really want to tap into your experience. I can see that we've already got lots of people in here entering inputs for us. Thank you for that. You'll also see in the STEM engagement section a section to ask questions. We've reserved time at the end of this session to address as many questions as time permits. It is already populated with questions that were submitted during the registration process for this town hall. You can add new questions or vote up ones already submitted. We'll start answering questions with the ones that received the most votes. I'll give you a few minutes now to enter your inputs for us on the barriers. As I can see, we've got several folks answering already. Some of the barriers that we're seeing are first training for STEM personnel, then funds for materials we do not need to charge participants. Students do not feel that NASA missions are relevant to them and their lives. Financial, location, disability, identity, immediate relevancy, a feeling that space is for all and not just the smartest in the room. So I'll give you a few minutes to look at that. If Tara, you see some ones that you'd like to highlight, please speak up. Convincing parents to sign their kids up for opportunities. You're not finding I see your question, Rachel, in the chat about not finding the survey at nasa.cnf.io. Let me. It should be there. So what you have to do, Rachel, is click on the NASA STEM engagement meeting, and that will open up our particular session today. Please let us know in the chat if you've been able to open that. Seeing a couple more things in there. The Space Act agreement requirement is a barrier. We'll see how will this. I see Sarah, you've entered some comments in the chat. Keith, your barriers box in IO is empty. That gives you the opportunity to input what barriers that you'd like us to know about. Give you another couple minutes. Knowledge that I see another one, knowledge that these programs and activities from NASA exist and are available for students. Okay, what we may do now is switch to the next question. We'll go ahead and leave the barriers open if you want to continue to add something there. But the next polling question that will open is the second question that Tara mentioned. So can we go to question 2? Thank you. So this next question is, how can NASA resources meet the needs of learners underrepresented in STEM and with varying ability and skill levels? So the first question was asking about barriers, and this one is asking specifically about how can NASA resources meet the needs of learners that you deal with that have been underrepresented in STEM and with varying ability and skill levels and where they are on their STEM journey. So that poll should be open now, and I invite you to provide us your inputs there. We got a lot of rich input on the barriers one, and so we'd like to get an equal set of rich input about how NASA resources can help meet those needs. So I see one, bring along the teachers. For every teacher engaged in programs, hundreds of students are also impacted. Highlight how the problems NASA is solving can tie into similar problems in their community. That's something that we've heard in other places in the research. Yes, Rachel, thanks for the clarification. What needs do NASA's STEM engagement K-12 stakeholders have for their students? And what we're really wanting to know how NASA resources can help meet those needs. Tara, feel free to join in here if there's something of particular note that you're seeing.
Yeah, I noticed in our social Q&A that the question around programmatic efforts to be being designed to increase engagement of underrepresented communities and providing documented best practices to share support efforts in this area. I saw that being voted up, and I think we're actually in the Office of STEM Engagement. If you think back to that slide that I presented with the different boxes showing our progression of evaluation, really trying to intentionally document the best practices that we are learning through research and practice for engaging underrepresented communities. This town hall is kind of informing some of those best practices by speaking with stakeholders that will continuously then come into play as we redesign and inform our K-12 programs. So these programmatic efforts are always underway. There's always a process for continuous improvement, and we stay on top of the literature, the research, and in touch with stakeholders so that we can document these best practices internally through evaluation reports, through literature reviews, through practice guides for our activity managers and project managers. So that is something that we try really hard to be intentional about and really stay on top of and stay recent with literature and our community.
Thanks, Tara. Looking at some of the other inputs that we've gotten about stakeholder needs, educators aren't always K-12 teachers. The providers need to be more broad to include non-classroom educators. We do have a very robust set of opportunities for out of school time entities. So our museum and science center opportunities, as well as our new one with community anchors, dealing with those that work in the informal space or in the out of school space. Highlight how the problems NASA is solving can tie into similar problems in their community. We're seeing that one again with the stakeholder needs. Make program engagements relevant to participants' daily lives. Obviously, there's a thread there. Again, we're seeing transportation to opportunities again. We just celebrated Girls in Aviation Day last Saturday. Would love to see a NASA Women's Day. I think there are some very strong feelings that NASA has that we have some phenomenal women working for us and doing some extraordinary jobs. And we're looking to make sure we can highlight the work that they're doing as possible role models for the future. Looking at, let's see, inclusivity through remote opportunities, accessible camps and workshops for students with disabilities interested in STEM. Give you another a minute or so to provide us with what other needs that NASA resources might be able to meet. Thank you for all this great input. I see something, bring administration on board. Okay, why don't we go ahead and leave that poll open. We'll go to our next polling question, which is about the impact that as the country continues to emerge from COVID. So this one has to do with post-pandemic education recovery. As Tara mentioned, we're interested in hearing from you about what NASA supports would make the most impact at a national level as the country continues to emerge from the impacts of COVID. We know that as educators, your time is valuable and there is a lot of things on your plate that you have to deal with. And one of those being how to help your students recover from the learning loss that may have happened during COVID. And we're very interested in what are the kinds of things that NASA could do to make an impact at the national level as we continue to emerge from COVID. There's been research about the challenges that educators are facing, the challenges that students are facing, and we'd really like to hear from you where you think we can make the most difference. Research in how to make remote learning more impactful and how to incorporate remote learning for students who need it. Very often we look to some of our colleagues and some of the other agencies for some of the research-based questions such as that. So for instance, the National Science Foundation does a lot of research, and we take advantage of the discoveries that they've found and the results that they've issued in some of those really kind of basic research questions. Seeing material kits sold at cost to teachers. It's cumbersome to gather materials for lessons. Every lesson plan could have the option to buy a ready-made set of supplies. Continue to provide subject matter experts virtually upon request rather than on a date set by NASA, as informal and after-school settings are normally unable to participate. We do have some work that we're looking at how we can make the connections with our subject matter experts be more impactful and valuable, and how we can find the best match of their talents with what the needs of our stakeholders are. And we may have one of our experts who's on the panel with us when we get to the Q&A address that. Funding after-school programs, launch accessible STEM challenges that teachers will be able to incorporate it in their courses, offer mentorship for high school students, start a social media campaign to encourage teachers and students to engage in STEM. There's a lot of suggestions in there that look very promising. NASA projects and goals unite our nation in exploration, and hope in the future is a great healer. Yes, we do have some phenomenal projects in the works. As you heard, our Artemis launch is happening very soon, and we're very excited about going back to the moon. The James Webb Space Telescope has released some of its first images, and in the weeks after the first images, some very exciting things have emerged from the space science world. We've got some exciting things going on with aeronautics in some new aircraft that's looking at the work we can do to lower the sonic boom noise. So there's lots of really exciting things that NASA has in the works. Reduce barriers to collaboration with other organizations. Allow scientists, engineers, and policymakers to visit classrooms to give talks. These leave a huge lasting impression on K-12 students. NASA speaker restrictions prevent many staff from being impactful as they are available outside work hours. Inspire and advocate for the next generation to enter the education field. Lots of good inputs there. We really appreciate this. Okay, we'll leave that poll open, and we'll go ahead and move to our last question. And as Tara mentioned, this area, we'd like your ideas for attracting diverse learners to STEM through learning opportunities that spark interest and provide connection to NASA's mission and work. And again, thinking about this through the lens of the students and the audiences that you work with, we're really interested in what's the best way that we can help attract those learners to STEM, what we can do to spark their interest, what we can do to provide connections to NASA's mission and work. And I think some of that we've already seen in some of your inputs to the prior questions. And here I'd like to invite you to look at this as an opportunity to provide us those thoughts that perhaps you didn't have and didn't find a way to insert into some of the other questions. This is very open, and we'd like to really know what we can do there. Access to STEM professionals from diverse backgrounds I'm seeing. I'd also like to draw your attention to the Q&A that is below the polls. So there's a social Q&A in there. As I said, it was pre-populated with questions that were submitted during registration. This tool gives you the opportunity to vote up questions that you'd like to hear us address during the Q&A portion of our session. And feel free, off to the right is a button that says Ask, where you can add questions that you've thought of that you'd like us to try and address. And again, I invite you to continually kind of check that Q&A and vote up questions that you see are important to you as you continue to provide us input on our final question. Kids whose schools don't focus on space may never hear about anything space related and may never get that spark. So what are, for that, I'd say, what are some suggestions for how we can help those schools or students hear more about space and hear what's going on? Making engagement activities available for use in after-school environments. Many of the materials and products and activities that we have are widely available in after-school environments. Many of our awardees in our museum and science center large awards, as well as the awardees and our community anchors, make great use of those resources in their out-of-school settings. Seek to meet them where they are at. Think social media, music, sports, job opportunities, or mentorships. You have to go to their hubs and communities. You can't expect them to find you. If you have some thoughts about what those hubs are or what those communities are, we'd certainly like to hear your thoughts on that, as that will help us as we continue to develop our programming. Digital workshop or traveling NASA camps are accessible to students in non-NASA center states. We do have several programs that meet that, and we'll continue to look at how we could expand those. Okay, what I'd like to do now is pivot to our social Q&A, and you'll see that underneath the poll questions in the IO tool. In addition to Mike, Chris, and Tara that you've heard, joining us are Carrie Olson and Maria Arredondo from our Next Gen STEM project, which focuses on K-12 and informal audiences. So I welcome Carrie and Maria to the conversation, and we'll start looking at the Q&A tools and identify the Q&A questions and identify who might be the best person to address those. The first one that's up at the top here is, what foreseeable plans does NASA have to make STEM programs more accessible to low-income areas and be inclusive of all students, including special populations? Carrie or Maria, is that something that you could help enlighten us on and provide some input for us on that?
Sure, Diane, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Carrie.
Okay, great. We have a number of things going on. You've mentioned one in particular a couple of times already, and that is our Community Anchor Awards. We have a solicitation open right now that closes on October 18th. And these are sort of smaller money awards, but we can give more of them than our traditional large Team 2 awards for informal education institutions. The idea behind it is to partner in this way with communities all over the country and they are specifically looking for communities who do have reach into underserved and underrepresented populations, and to kind of be our boots on the ground and bring that NASA touch, that NASA inspiration into those communities and those institutions that are we had our first cohort was awarded last year, and they are doing great things. There's 21 of them awarded. We hope to award at least that many this year. But they are the people that know their communities the best, and so that's one way we feel like we could really do more of like a lot of what I was hearing you read from the O-Tool, Diane. Another thing that we're working on, we piloted it last year, is called Spark. It's a whole different take of challenges. It's very incremental. Teachers can jump in at the level where they feel like their students are. It's meant to be very intimidating. And we've specifically partnered with organizations that bring us underserved or underrepresented students. It went pretty well, but we learned a lot, and with the help of Tara and her team of doing evaluation with us as we went through and really assessing how we were doing on our stated goals. We are redesigning it this year from what we learned, and they're also running alongside us again this year to help us make sure we incorporate what we learned and also to evaluate how things are going. So that's going to kick off again next school year. With a wholly revamped, and it's not like our traditional challenges where you have to go out and build a rocket, or there are things that can be done in the classroom, in the after-school space, but it's like a 6 weeks worth of stuff. So it's a deep engagement, and another thing we have going on. I got so many things going on, and I'm gonna let Maria jump in for everything I forget. We have launched our Connect online community of practice, which is for all educators, and it's a place to find out the latest things that are going on, not just from Next Gen STEM or the Office of STEM Engagement, but the entire agency, as far as opportunities in K-12, special events, virtual events with subject matter experts, some of them astronauts, some of them like maybe the SLS chief engineer. That's another thing we've gotten the work. But just ways for people to engage with experts. Another thing that's on the horizon, which I think which scratches the itch of a lot of the things I saw in the questions in the chat, is a better way to pair students and educators with people inside the agency, and hopefully people that look like the kids in the communities that you serve. So NASA's had this thing called Speakers Bureau forever, which was basically just a way for somebody to submit a request for a speaker. This is going to take that so much further and have a modern tool that matches needs, and it's not just about speaking. It could be a lot of things, a lot of different ways to engage. Someone mentioned mentorship for high school students and things like that. I think the sky's the limit on that, and we are just beginning development for that. So I've prattled on. I don't know, Maria, what did I forget?
Hi, good afternoon. I think the only item I would mention, Carrie, to that large list is that all of the content that we're currently creating with Next Gen STEM is currently undergoing a review for cultural relevancy. And so with that review, we're ensuring that information we're sharing about our opportunities at NASA and activities for students to participate in is relevant to multiple communities. Reviewing the science discourse used within those activities and making it more relatable to everyday life for students, and then also beta testing those products with our focused audience, which is students that are generally underrepresented in STEM or from low-income communities. Thanks for the opportunity to share.
I just thought also we are and have we've been translating all of our products into Spanish as well, and we're still we don't have them all done yet, but we're working on that. And like, for instance, we just had an event a few days ago for Hispanic Heritage Month for our Connects community of practice members, where we had over 40 classrooms and over 4,000 students tied in on a Teams call, really, with former astronaut Jose Hernandez, who started his life as the child of migrant workers. And he really connected, and he did all the answers and questions. If that was asked in Spanish, he answered it in both languages, and if the question was asked in English. But anyway, it was very impactful for those students, especially a lot of the ones who tuned in do have stories similar to Jose's, and so that was a great connection that we did just recently.
As you can hear, Carrie and Maria are enthusiastic about all that we've got going within our Next Gen STEM project and all the great work that we're doing in the K-12 community, both formal and informal. So I'd like to go to the next question. What is NASA doing to create an environment that encourages folks from the LGBTQ+ community to get involved in STEM and space exploration? What I'd like to do is see if, Chris, is this a question that you would like to address for us?
Sure, Diane. That's a great question. I think that you've heard, in a sense, threaded throughout some of the things that we've shared with you today, and certainly the things that you've just heard from Carrie and Maria, particularly around K-12 and the work we're doing. We have created, in a sense, I like to call it a movement, and it's now really in our DNA and in our lexicon, this idea of broadening student participation. And in thinking about how can NASA contribute to making an impact in achieving more diversity in STEM. And so particularly when we think about LGBTQ, that falls in the realm, I think, of a number of other what we call our underserved and underrepresented categories of students. Is first and foremost is we take every opportunity we can to get NASA superstars that are out there doing really exciting work in STEM to be able to participate in opportunities like Carrie just mentioned, with Jose Fernandez, in having students be able to readily see themselves in STEM through the lens of looking at someone who's like them. In addition to that, we're really looking at creating opportunities for students when they are interacting with us to be able to be interacting with people from all walks of life and across these categories in underserved and underrepresented. So for instance, when our NASA interns join us, we treat them like they're our employees. They're here for a period of time, but they are interacting with mentors on a daily basis. And then we immerse them in various opportunities for them to get to understand and really learn from cohorts of people. And so as an example, we have employee resource groups, and in this particular question, we have LGBTQ employee resource groups at the NASA centers where students can interact with those ERGs and really benefit from hearing from those employees about what they did in their careers and how they could navigate through the environment in STEM to be able to do well and thrive in the environment. So that's one example, I think, of a number of things, but I think that we hold near and dear to us in the work that we do with students and with educators to really have an ability to have students, again, be able to see themselves in STEM in a powerful way. And we think that there's a lot more that we can do there. So and we can do a lot more with all of you in that work.
Thank you, Chris. It's nice to work for an agency that really puts that to the forefront and really thinks about employees of all different backgrounds that have that are working with us. The next question I think I'd like to address is for Tara, and how is equity in STEM engagement being assessed? And I know Tara talked a little bit about that earlier and elaborated on it some. I'd like to give her a chance to weigh in again on that.
Yeah, and this is such a great question because we're setting some big goals here, and really being able to measure our progress towards these goals is really important to not just hold ourselves accountable for the goals that we're setting, but to be transparent and make things that are working for students. There's a real group of people that we're trying to impact here, and that's really important to the work we do when we're trying to assess the outcomes of our work. I think in equity and assessing equity, we are doing this on many different levels. Carrie and Maria shared a little bit about the Next Gen STEM project and how they were assessing implementation of the Sparks program and redesigning. And part of that implementation at that project activity level is looking at equity. Are we reaching the students that we're looking to reach? Are we having those kinds of outreach activities that are getting the students and lowering barriers to entry? So there's this evaluation component to implementing a activity or program that looks at that level on barriers to access, and are the students that we are looking to serve being served, and if it's hitting those outcomes of interest. On a larger scale, we have what we call a learning agenda, which sets bigger evaluation questions for us as in the Office of STEM Engagement, to look at these bigger efforts around equity. Are we broadening participation through our higher education efforts and internships? Are we attracting diverse groups of students from K-12? And we will actually set different studies that look at these programs, activities that contribute to these large questions over time. So we are currently looking at equity in higher education internships over the course of, we are in a phase 2, so 2 years, at whether we are broadening participation at that level through our internships program. We have a K-12, as you saw that slide. We have been looking really first at defining what is attracting students to STEM, getting input, and now looking to have some of those surveys and things to make sure we are having those outcomes of interest. So we have a lot of different ways to look at equity, from the program activity level all the way up to, is our portfolio meeting and serving the needs of students and those large goals. And we take all of that together to look at really on a yearly basis and say, are we hitting the mark, and what do we need to look at, and how do we keep moving forward?
Thanks, Tara. And I think we have time for one more question. What I'd like to do is address the one about early childhood education, because there were several of those that were submitted ahead of time. Are there plans for more STEM education for very young children? I see a lot of emphasis on middle school education, but it should begin in the earlier grades, I believe. And I see Carrie has come on camera, so let me turn it to Carrie and for her response.
It's almost like you guys are reading my mind. We've been talking about this a lot lately, because for a long period of time, you're right, and not just NASA, but a lot of people have been focusing on middle school. And because that was what a lot of research was telling people was sort of like the really important spot. I almost look at it as the last time period in which you have any hope to really change the minds of a lot of kids who maybe think they're not STEM people or whatever. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't start earlier. I'm a grandmother of 3 young grandchildren, 6, 4, and 9 months. And I watch their little curious brains at 2 and 3 and 4, and how excited they get about different STEM topics just naturally. So we are looking like we do have some resources and things for young students. We are looking at the Sparks suite of challenges and student engagements from the kindergarten to 12 perspective. But we are particularly looking this coming year at putting some effort into creating more products and experiences for the younger end of the spectrum. So yes, we're right there with you.
Hey,
Thank you,
Diane.
Carrie. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add to what Carrie just said that we're also, one of our priorities in addition to enhancing K-12 is looking to expand our reach and impact through partnerships. And an example of something that we've done recently that's really helping in the early childhood impact arena is our partnership with Noggin, which is Nickelodeon's educational platform for early childhood. And we, through some activities that we have done with Noggin and modules that they've created, we've literally reached millions of students through that platform. And we're really excited about our partnership with them. And that's one of a number of different things that we're looking at in our partnerships in order to build that foundation on the earlier end of K-12.
Great, Chris. Thank you so much. That is a good point. So that brings us very close. It brings us to our 4:30 time. Next slide, Lisa. We are having some technical difficulties in getting our last poll. So I'm going to put it in just write them into the chat. If you can answer that in the chat before you sign off. And while I do that, let me turn it over to Mike for any final last comments.
I just think it's always a good time to hear what people are thinking about. And I hope that as you reflect on today, you hear that we're trying to use your tax dollars to make a difference with students all across the country. And thank you for giving us insights into that, and that together we can make a difference. Hopefully we are using NASA's mission to start from the very beginning, right? How do we use NASA's mission to inspire kids to study and consider careers in STEM? And you've seen lots of different ways. So thanks for joining us today. We look forward to continuing to brief you as these things go on. Thank you very much for your time, and thanks for the team for pulling us together today.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tara, Carrie, and Maria for your time. But most of all, thanks to all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We are always looking to gather feedback, as it helps, as Tara talked about, it helps us improve our work and make sure that we're servicing your needs and the needs of our students. Let me put the last question in here. And we'll go ahead and leave this open for a couple of minutes. So those of you that are able to respond in the chat that would be very helpful. But with that, if you think you're done providing us input, if there's any last input you'd like to give us in the IO tool polls, we would welcome that. And otherwise, hope you have a good rest of your day. And I was going to say a good rest of your afternoon, but if we have folks joining us from Hawaii or Alaska, it is still morning out there. So thank you all.